The Galactic Xenobiological Institute on Station Epsilon was, by any measure, the most sterile place in the known universe. It smelled of recycled ozone, filtered consciousness, and the faint, metallic tang of academic superiority. Every surface was a smooth, pearlescent white, designed by the Cthar to be calming to the multifaceted eyes of the 37 species that called the Institute home. To a human, it looked like the inside of a giant, cosmic egg that had been bleached, polished, and then sued for being too interesting. The air hummed with the gentle thrum of life support, grav plates, and the low, constant murmur of intellectual condescension that was the station's primary export. Presiding over this temple of biological study were beings like High Analyst Xyler. Xyler was a Cthar, a species that looked like a collaboration between a praying mantis and a concert pianist. He had 4 long, delicate limbs for manipulation, 2 for locomotion, and a chitinous exoskeleton the color of old ivory. His head, a triangular wedge of polished carapace, held 2 enormous, compound eyes that saw the universe in spectrums of data and probability. The Cthar had catalogued over 1 million species, and they held the quiet, unshakable conviction that they understood the fundamental rules of life. Life, in their view, was a complex equation of environmental pressure versus biological adaptation. A species was the sum of its world's dangers. Then there was Chief of Security Gronder, a Vexian. Vexians were the opposite of the Cthar in nearly every conceivable way. They were mountains of silicon-laced granite. Sentient geology that had decided violence was a valid form of debate. Gronder's body was a fortress of jagged, gray plates. His fists were the size of small asteroids, and his voice sounded like a rockslide arguing with a volcano. The Vexian philosophy was simple: strength was the only truth. A creature's worth was measured by its ability to exert force upon its environment, preferably by breaking it. Natural armor, claws, fangs, bioelectric discharges. These were the hallmarks of a successful species. And it was this fundamental disagreement on what constituted a successful species that led them, inevitably, to humanity. The official Galactic Concordance entry for Homo sapiens was a masterpiece of unintentional comedy. It described them as Class 2B Death World Persistence Predators, a designation that was mostly theoretical. The Death World classification for their planet of origin, Earth, was considered a clerical error by most serious academics. While data probes had confirmed the planet possessed an unusual number of high-tier predators and environmental hazards, the dominant species was, well, them. Bipedal, soft-skinned, endoskeletal primates with no natural weapons, no armor, and a shockingly low tolerance for vacuum. They were a biological contradiction. Their technology was impressive, yes. Their jump drives were chaotic but effective, and their communication networks were a beautiful mess of redundant systems. But the creature itself was a joke. They were fragile. A minor shift in atmospheric nitrogen could send them into convulsions. A temperature variance of 50 degrees Celsius was lethal. They had to encase themselves in clumsy, articulated armor just to survive in environments most species considered temperate. They possessed a flimsy calcium-based internal skeleton that was prone to snapping under moderate G-forces. And worst of all, they were emotionally unstable, prone to fits of illogical bonding, irrational aggression, and a bizarre state they called boredom, which apparently drove them to perform needlessly dangerous activities. So, when the Institute was granted a human liaison, it was treated as a bizarre academic coup. They were getting a living, breathing specimen of the galaxy's greatest cosmic joke. A creature that had somehow stumbled out of its planetary cradle and into the stars through sheer, dumb luck. A walking, talking exhibit of evolutionary inadequacy. His name was Jake. Jake arrived on a standard personnel transport, looking profoundly and disappointingly average. He wore flexible denim trousers, a faded black t-shirt with a stylized graphic of a skeletal figure and some illegible text, and soft-soled foot coverings. He wasn't particularly tall or short. He wasn't particularly muscular or thin. His face was an unremarkable collection of features: 2 forward-facing eyes, a central breathing orifice, and a mouth. Compared to the glorious diversity of the station, the crystalline shimmer folk, the gaseous denizens of Cygnus X, 1, Gronder's walking geology, Jake was about as threatening as a damp towel. He was led to the observation wing, a series of interconnected biosuites where he would serve as a cultural and biological baseline. Xyler and Gronder observed him from a control room, separated by a wall of transparent hyperdiamond. They watched as Jake ambled into the sterile white room, looked around, and gave a small, polite wave to the observation window. "Observe, Chief Gronder," Xyler intoned, his voice a series of soft, precise clicks and whistles translated by the station's network. "The specimen's integumentary system. It is utterly devoid of natural protection. A single claw strike from a juvenile Grolak would eviscerate it." Gronder grunted, a sound like tectonic plates shifting. "Its musculature is pathetic. All stringy, inefficient protein fibers. I could snap its primary support column with one manipulator." He gestured with a hand that could pulverize tungsten. "Why does it stand on only 2 limbs? It is an inherently unstable configuration. A simple push would render it prone and helpless." "A fascinating question," Xyler mused, his multifaceted eyes cataloging every detail. "Their file suggests it is an adaptation for endurance hunting, a laughable concept where the predator simply walks after its prey until the prey expires from exhaustion. A method of breathtaking inefficiency. It speaks to a world with remarkably stupid prey." On the other side of the glass, Jake had discovered the room's nutrient dispenser. He poked it a few times, then shrugged and began to investigate the atmospheric controls. He seemed entirely at ease, humming a tuneless, repetitive melody. This, in itself, was baffling. Most species, when placed in a sterile containment facility under the observation of 2 clearly superior beings, displayed signs of acute stress. Their biomonitors would show elevated heart rates, spikes in adrenal equivalents, and nervous system agitation. Jake's readings were placid. His heart rate was a slow, steady 60 beats per minute. His neural activity was consistent with a state of mild, pleasant curiosity. It was the biological signature of a creature without a single care in the universe. "Its lack of a threat response is anomalous," Xyler noted, a flicker of something that wasn't quite confusion crossing his analytical mind. "Perhaps its sensory organs are too primitive to comprehend its situation. Or it is too unintelligent," Gronder rumbled. "It possesses the situational awareness of a fungus." This was the prevailing opinion of humanity for the first 3 rotations. Jake was a simple, fragile, and rather boring creature. He answered their questions with a patient, informal demeanor that they interpreted as a lack of proper education. He used bizarre analogies that were utterly meaningless. When asked to describe humanity's governing structures, he compared them to a homeowners association run by toddlers. When asked about their military philosophy, he said it was mostly hoping the other guy has to deal with your logistics paperwork. Everything was a joke. Nothing was taken seriously. He was, they concluded, a representative of a species of cosmic clowns. And then, the Institute received a new acquisition. It came from the planet Xylos 7, a world so hostile it was designated a Category 5 death trap, a planet where the air itself was a corrosive acid, and the flora had evolved to be more cunningly lethal than most species' fauna. The acquisition was a specimen of Morsus crystallinus, known colloquially as the Xylosian death apple. It wasn't a fruit. It was a silicon-based crystalline life form that had evolved to mimic the appearance of edible flora to lure in and neutralize the planet's apex predators. The death apple was beautiful. It sat inside a triple-sealed, stasis-locked, zero-atmosphere containment case in the high-risk biology lab. It looked like it was carved from a single, flawless ruby, with facets that caught the light and splintered it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It was about the size of a human fist, and it pulsed with a faint, internal light. It was also one of the most poisonous things in the known galaxy. Its defense mechanism was a neurotoxin of staggering complexity and potency. A single microgram, if inhaled or absorbed through the skin, would trigger a complete and irreversible shutdown of the central nervous system of any carbon-based life form. The process was described in the acquisition report as rapid, agonizing, and comprehensive. It didn't just kill you. It unraveled you, neuron by neuron. The Kthar had tested it on 20 different species via remote drone. The results were universally and gruesomely consistent. Xyler was ecstatic. This was the ultimate expression of environmental pressure. A world so deadly it produced crystalline assassins disguised as fruit. He and his team planned to spend the next decade carefully sequencing its genome and analyzing its toxin. The death apple was kept 3 sectors away from any living creature, behind layers of security that would have made a Vexian warlord proud. The inciting incident, as is so often the case, was not a dramatic explosion or a cunning act of sabotage. It was a simple, stupid mistake. A junior Kthar technician, flustered by a superior's critique of his data entry speed, cross-wired 2 transport commands in the station's automated specimen delivery system. He meant to send a nutrient paste packet, designated Sample 7B, to the human's biosuite. Instead, he routed containment case 7B-X, the one holding the death apple. The station's safety protocols were, of course, extensive, but they were designed by the Kthar, a species that believed in logical, orderly processes. The system saw a valid, authenticated command to transport an item from one lab to another. It checked for atmospheric compatibility. The case was sealed, so that was fine. It checked for radiation hazards. None. It checked for biocontamination risks. The case was rated for absolute containment. The system, being a logical entity, could not conceive of a reason why a researcher would intentionally send the deadliest object on the station to the living quarters of the most fragile one. So it complied. In the observation room, Zyler was lecturing Gronder on the subtle beauty of the death apple's molecular structure, displaying it on the main screen. You see, Chief, it is not brute force. It is elegance. A perfect key designed for the lock of life itself. It does not crush, it simply turns off. Gronder was unimpressed. A fancy rock. If it is so deadly, why does it not have spikes? It was at that moment that a soft chime echoed through the human's biosuite. A small panel slid open in the wall, and a pneumatic arm extended, placing a sealed containment case on the central platform. It was the wrong case. It was the case. The one with the shimmering, ruby-red crystal inside. Zyler froze. All 4 of his upper limbs locked in place. His multifaceted eyes widened, the thousands of tiny lenses dilating in unison. He processed the image. He processed the location. He cross-referenced the transport logs. The probability of this event was so infinitesimally small that his analytical mind briefly crashed, rebooted, and then crashed again. No, he whispered, the translator turning the clicks into a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Gronder looked from the screen to the biosuite, his granite-like features somehow managing to pale. He didn't understand the science, but he understood the look on Zyler's face. It was the look of a creature that had just watched the laws of physics take a holiday. Then the second, even more statistically impossible thing happened. The containment case, having been jostled during its improper transport, suffered a microscopic fracture in its primary seal. The station's atmospheric sensors, which were sensitive enough to detect a single rogue molecule of methane from 5 sectors away, screamed. Red lights flashed across the control room, bathing everything in the color of panic. A synthesized voice, calm and terrifying, announced, "Warning! Class 10 biohazard containment breach in Sector Gamma 7. Bijo Suite 4. Initiating lockdown. Evacuate all adjacent sectors." The containment case hissed. A faint, almost invisible vapor leaked from the hairline crack. Inside the biosuite, the air scrubbers went into overdrive, but it was too late. The toxin was airborne. Zyler let out a series of high-pitched clicks that the translator rendered as a single, sustained scream. The specimen. He's doomed. The atmospheric concentration is already 5,000 times the lethal dose. Gronder slammed his fist on the emergency console, which, to its credit, only cracked slightly. "Seal the room. Can we purge the atmosphere?" "It's too late," Zyler shrieked, his composure utterly shattered. "His cellular structure is already dissolving. We are about to witness the complete biological deconstruction of a Homo sapiens in real time. Document everything." Even in his terror, the scientist in him was taking notes. They both stared through the hyperdiamond window, expecting to see Jake collapse, to see him clawing at his throat, to see his soft, fleshy body melt into a puddle of organic slurry. But Jake did none of those things. He had been examining a light fixture when the alarm went off. He looked over at the flashing red lights with an expression of mild annoyance, the look of a man whose television show had just been interrupted by a breaking news report. He saw the containment case on the platform, saw the faint shimmer of vapor escaping it, and tilted his head. He walked over to it. He didn't run. He didn't crawl. He ambled. "What is he doing?" Gronder roared, his voice rattling the very bones of the station. "The fool is walking toward it. Suicidal insanity," Zyler whimpered, his delicate manipulators trembling. "His primitive brain cannot process the danger. It is a failure of the fight-or-flight instinct." Jake reached the platform. He peered at the beautiful, deadly object inside the now-failing case. The case itself, reacting to the internal pressure change, chose that moment to pop its lid open with a soft pft. The death apple now sat on its velvet pedestal, completely exposed to the room's atmosphere, pulsing gently. The biomonitors tracking Jake went haywire. The station's medical AI began issuing automated eulogies. Jake reached in. He picked it up. Zyler made a sound that no Kthar had ever made before. It was a wet, gurgling noise of pure, unadulterated disbelief. He might have actually fainted for a second. Jake held the crystalline object in his palm. He turned it over, admiring the way the light caught its facets. He brought it close to his face, to his primary olfactory sensor. He sniffed it. "By the 10 hells of Vex," Gronder whispered, his voice losing its gravelly edge and becoming something thin and reedy. He is smelling it." The act was so alien, so contrary to every known survival instinct in the galaxy, that it broke something in their minds. You do not smell the supernova. You do not taste the black hole. And you do not, under any circumstances, get intimate with a Class 10 biohazard. Jake seemed pleased by the scent. He gave a little nod, as if confirming a suspicion. Then, he did the impossible. He opened his mouth, revealing his absurdly blunt, white enamel teeth, and he took a bite. The sound, amplified by the comm system in the room, echoed through the silent control center. Crunch. It was the sound of 1,000 biological textbooks spontaneously combusting. It was the sound of Zyler's entire worldview being shoved into a paper shredder. It was the sound of Gronder's concept of strength being revealed as a childish fantasy. Jake chewed thoughtfully, his brow furrowed in concentration. He swallowed. He looked at the death apple, at the perfect bite mark he'd left in its crystalline structure. He took another bite. Crunch. In the control room, Zyler had collapsed. His lanky frame was draped over the console like a discarded lab coat. Gronder was still standing, but he was frozen solid, a statue of petrified confusion. His warrior mind, trained to analyze threats and react in nanoseconds, had encountered a piece of data it could not compute. The human was eating the apocalypse, and he seemed to be enjoying it. The station's lockdown protocols had, by this point, gone into full-blown hysterics. Doors slammed shut. Quarantine fields flickered into existence, and a medical emergency team was automatically dispatched. The doors to the observation deck burst open, and a xylophyte medic scrambled in. Xylophytes were small, gelatinous beings that moved via a series of controlled, sloshing motions inside their environmental suits. This one, named Fleep, was the best emergency physician on the station. He held a large, multi-nozzled auto-injector filled with a cocktail of every known universal antidote. It was a last-ditch, brute-force medical tool designed to flood a system and hope something worked. "Don't move, human," Fleep squeaked, his voice amplified by his suit's speaker. It came out sounding like a terrified balloon. "We've detected the xylosian neurotoxin in your biosuite. A lethal dose. I have the antidote. Hold perfectly still." Fleep slid to a halt just outside the hyperdiamond window, fumbling with the injector's activation sequence. He was preparing to override the door controls and rush in, a suicidal but noble act to save the fascinatingly fragile specimen. Inside the biosuite, Jake had just taken his third bite. He paused, the death apple held halfway to his mouth, and looked at the frantic, blob-like creature on the other side of the glass. He chewed, swallowed, and then spoke, his voice calm and clear over the calm. "An antidote?" he asked, with genuine, untroubled curiosity. "For what?" And as the medic stared, his eye stalks quivering, Jake took another deliberate, leisurely bite of the death apple. The crunch echoed in the sudden, Profound silence. Fleep froze, the massive injector sagging in his manipulator grips. The bioscanner on his wrist was screaming a silent, digital scream. It was trying to measure the toxin levels in the human system, but the numbers were simply impossible. It showed a concentration that should have been able to kill a moon. But the human's life signs were not just stable, they were perfect. His heart rate was still a placid 60 beats per minute. His brain activity showed contentment. Jake finished the last bite of the death apple, licking a stray crystal fragment off his finger. He sighed contentedly. A little tart, he announced to the room, and to the shell-shocked audience beyond it. Tastes a bit like a Granny Smith. A little metallic on the back end, though. You guys got any caramel dip? It had really cut the acidity. That was the sentence that broke them. Xyler, who had just begun to stir, promptly fainted again. Gronder stumbled backwards, crashing into the rear wall of the control room with a boom that shook the entire deck. Fleep the medic simply dropped the universal antidote. It clattered to the floor, its precious life-saving contents spilling in a useless, iridescent puddle. The xylophyte just stared, his mind a complete blank. Later, after the alarms had been silenced and the station had been assured that it was not, in fact, about to be consumed by a plague of death fruit, they demanded an explanation. They did it from the safety of the control room. No one was brave enough to enter the bio-suite. Gronder, Xyler, revived with smelling salts and a stiff dose of reality, and Fleep all stared at Jake through the hyperdiamond. Jake was sitting on the floor, cross-legged, looking perfectly happy. You consumed it, Xyler stammered, his voice trembling. The Morsus crystallinus. You ingested a solid-state, silicon-based organism containing a neurotoxin potent enough to sterilize a continent. This thing? Jake asked, gesturing to his empty stomach. Yeah, it was pretty good. A bit gritty. So what's the big deal? The big deal. Gronder bellowed, his voice cracking with sheer emotional overload. The big deal is that you should be a puddle of decomposed proteins. You should be a memory. Our scanners say you have enough poison in you to kill my entire species twice. Jake chuckled. It was a warm, easy sound that was somehow the most terrifying thing they had ever heard. Oh, that. Right. Look, you guys are thinking about this all wrong. You're used to worlds where life is sensible. He leaned forward, a friendly, professorial look on his face. Where I come from, a planet you guys have classified as a garden world. This kind of thing is just Tuesday. See, Earth is not a garden. It's a high-stakes, all-you-can-eat death buffet, and everything is on the menu, including the diners. He held up a finger. Let's start with plants. On your worlds, plants are peaceful photosynthesizers. On Earth, they're locked in a chemical arms race that would make your best weapons designers weep. We have plants that produce a chemical called capsaicin. It's a neurotoxin designed to simulate the experience of being set on fire for any mammal that eats it. It's a brutally effective defense mechanism. We humans took a bite, screamed a bit, and then decided it was delicious. We call it spicy. We have competitions to see who can eat the most potent version and endure the most agony for fun. Xyler was frantically typing on his console, cross-referencing Jake's words. His multifaceted eyes were wide with horror. He was finding peer-reviewed papers on it. It was true. Then there's animals. Jake continued, warming to his subject. We have a fish, the pufferfish. Parts of its body contain a tetrodotoxin so powerful that a single fish can kill 30 adult humans. There is no antidote. We decided this was an acceptable risk for a light lunch. We trained chefs for years just to learn how to slice it correctly, and even then, sometimes they get it wrong. People still line up to eat it. They call it a delicacy. Fleep the medic was making soft, whimpering noises inside his suit. The toxin in your death apple, Jake said, making air quotes with his fingers, is actually pretty familiar. It's a complex protein that attacks the sodium channels in nerve cells, right? Causes paralysis and respiratory failure. On Earth, we have something similar. The venom of the blue-ringed octopus. It's a tiny little guy, fits in the palm of your hand, looks beautiful. Its venom is 1,000 times more potent than cyanide. Or there's the box jellyfish. Or any of the 50 species of hypervenomous snakes that live on just one of our continents. Honestly, your apple's toxin is a bit amateurish. Amateurish, Xyler squeaked. It is a perfect, evolutionarily honed killing agent. Yeah, For this part of the galaxy, maybe, Jake said with a shrug. On Earth, it would have to compete with things like botulinum toxin, which we use for cosmetic procedures to smooth out wrinkles. We literally inject the most poisonous substance known to science into our faces for vanity. You see, your fundamental misunderstanding is this. You think life seeks to avoid danger. Human life seeks to conquer it, domesticate it, and then deep fry it and serve it with a dipping sauce. He stood up and stretched. I had to build up an immunity to a similar alkaloid compound back in college. There was this fraternity, long story, it involved a bucket, a goat, and a lot of bad decisions. The point is, our bodies are ridiculous. We have this organ called a liver that's basically a full-time, military-grade detoxification unit. It works over time. We pickle ourselves in a cellular poison called ethanol for recreation. We inhale carcinogenic smoke. We drink bitter, neurotoxic bean juice every morning just to feel awake. Your death apple was a novelty, sure, but on the grand scale of stupid things I've put in my body, it barely cracks the top 10-inch. Gronder stared at him, his rocky jaw slack. You poison yourselves for fun. We call them hobbies, Jake corrected him gently. We climb mountains with no safety gear. We jump out of perfectly good aircraft. We swim with sharks. We have an entire continent, Australia, where it seems like evolution just gave up and decided to make everything as lethal as possible as a joke. Humans moved there and built cities. They complain about the traffic. Zyler had stopped typing. He was simply staring at the screen, which now displayed an encyclopedia entry on the Australian taipan, a snake whose venom could kill 100 men with a single bite. Below it were linked videos of a human in shorts and a floppy hat cheerfully picking one up with a long stick. The Kthar analyst looked at the human, this soft, fragile, ridiculous-looking creature. He wasn't a biological joke. He was a biological horror story. Humanity wasn't a species that had survived its world. It was a species that had been forged in it. They weren't persistence predators. They were persistence survivors. They had outstubborned a planet that was actively, maliciously trying to kill them at every turn. They hadn't just survived the death world. They had won. The realization crashed down on Zyler and Gronder with the force of a physical blow. They had been housing a god of destruction in a t-shirt and jeans. They had been offering it nutrient paste when it was clearly capable of dining on pure chaos. Their condescension, their academic pity, it all curdled into a new, unfamiliar emotion, a deep, profound, and existential terror. Zyler finally found his voice. It was a thin, trembling whisper. So, your entire species, you are all like this? This resilient. Jake let out a soft laugh and shook his head. Oh, heavens no. Me? Nah, I'm actually a bit of a wimp. I get hay fever in the spring, and I'm terrible with spicy food. All the really tough ones stay on Earth. He smiled a friendly, terrifying smile. You should meet my sister. She's a kindergarten teacher.